Sige, patawag lang. The 82nd session of the Senate in the second regular session of Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Joseph Victor G. Ejercito will lead our chamber in prayer. Senator Ejercito.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Heavenly Father, we praise you for blessing us today. We also thank you for filling us with your abounding grace, wisdom, and sustenance in serving our country. In doing good to our legislative work, may always remind us that every service we render is not in vain. Give us perseverance, knowing that in due season we will reap the harvest of integrity, good governance, and peace. Assure us always that you are sovereign and are the Lord of this nation. We continually invoke your blessings to our people and to this chamber. We ask all of this in the name of Jesus Christ our Savior. Amen.
Amen. With the permission of the chamber, the chair declares a 1-minute suspension. Huh? One more? Huh? Ilan lang sa loob? The session is resumed. The secretary will call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan, Peter Compañero S., Cayetano Pia S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Honasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar. Senate President Trillan.
13 senators are present. The chair declares the presence of a quorum. The majority leader is recognized.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 81st Session, June 2, 2015, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none, the reading of the journal of the previous session is hereby dispensed with and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, before we move for the reference of business, may we acknowledge some guests in the gallery. We have barangay captains and barangay councilors from Silang Cavite, headed by ABC President Francisco Paulo Crisostomo. We also have the parents of the gallant SAF 44, namely parents of SAF PO2 Nicky Nasino Jr., family of SAF Noble Kiangan. We also have the Liga ng mga Barangay San Juan City Chapter, headed by Councilor Allen Silvano. I move for the recognition, Mr. President.
Our guests are welcome to the Senate. Your presence is made of record for today's session.
Mr. President, we also have with us Mayor Miguel of Coronadal City.
Yes, Mayor Miguel of Coronadal City is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will read the reference of business.
Messages of the President of the Philippines. Letters of His Excellency President Benigno Aquino III, dated 29 May 2015, submitting for the Senate's consideration and concurrence the amendment to the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, which was signed on 6 September 2005, and the agreement establishing a CN+3 Macroeconomic Research Office, AMRO, which was signed on 10 October 2014 in Washington, D.C., United States of America.
Foreign Relations.
House Number 4308, entitled, anak,
What?
Bills of First Reading. Senate Number 2793, entitled, an act expanding the coverage of Republic Act Number 10627, otherwise known as the Anti-Bullying Act of 2013, amending for this purpose Sections 2 and 6 thereof and providing penalties therefor, by Senator Sani Angara.
Education, Arts and Culture.
Communications, letter from the Department of Labor and Employment dated 27 May 2015 submitting to the Senate the semi-annual report to Congress July to December 2014 based on the submission of its Philippine Overseas Labor Offices pursuant to the DOLE's obligation as stated under Rule 17, Sections 2 and 3 of Republic Act Number 10022 Series of 2010.
Labor, Employment, Human Resource Development, Foreign Relations.
Letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15A of RA number 7653, the New Central Bank Act, circular letters number CL 2015-27, 28, 29, 30, and 31, dated 23 April 6, 7, and 14 May 2015, and memorandum number M 2015-022, dated 6 May 2015.
Banks, Financial Institutions, and Charity.
Committee report number 170, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, Public Services, and Constitutional Amendments, Revision Codes, and Senate number 2794, with Senators Escudero, Trillanes IV, Defensor Santiago, and Grace Poe as authors thereof, entitled An Act Providing for a New Anti-Carnapping Law of the Philippines, recommending its approval, in substitution of Senate numbers 596, 798, 1744, 2756, and taking into consideration PS Resolution number 1327 and House number 4544, sponsor Senator Grace Poe.
Ordinary business.
Additional reference of business. Committee report number 171, submitted by the Committee on Foreign Relations, House number 4889, introduced by Representative Bichara et al., entitled An Act Defining the Maritime Zones of the Republic of the Philippines, recommending its approval with amendments, taking into consideration Senate numbers 39 and 174, sponsor Senator Sani Angara.
Ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I think the Minority Leader wishes to make a parliamentary inquiry. I move for his recognition.
Senator Soto is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. I do have a parliamentary inquiry.
Please proceed.
I distinctly remember a few weeks ago, there was a motion on the floor to refer the Bangsamoro Basic Law to the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws. And if you will recall, Mr. President, I objected because I said that according to our rules, a bill or a pending bill in the Senate should only be referred to two committees, and a third or fourth committee can only be the Committee on Ways and Means and Finance. Nevertheless, what transpired, if I recall it right, was that there was a suspension of the rules. I do not recall agreeing to it, but I think I acquiesced, and it was referred to the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws. Now, yesterday and today, I have been monitoring not only the news, but also the hearings being conducted by the Committee on Local Government on the BBL. And it has come to my attention that yesterday, even today, and some pronouncements by the other members of the Senate, that there is a huge issue on the funding. As a matter of fact, one senator was quoted to ask who will pay for the BBL. So, Mr. President, I would like to ask the Committee on Rules or the Secretariat why we should not refer the BBL to the Committee on Finance or the Committee on Ways and Means as well, Mr. President. The Majority Leader is not here. I understand the situation, but perhaps we can look into the matter and resolve it by Monday, Mr. President.
Well, the query is referred to the Committee on Rules. Hopefully, the chair of the Committee on Rules and Majority Leader will be available by Monday. But yes, the query is referred to the Committee on Rules for appropriate disposition.
Thank you,
Mr. President.
President.
Thank you, Senator
Thank you,
Soto.
Minority Leader. Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we recognize Senator Cynthia Villar. Senator Cynthia Villar to speak on a matter of public interest. So moved.
Senator Villar is recognized on a question of public interest.
Mr. President, arise on a matter of personal privilege. The United Nations General Assembly, through the Food and Agriculture Organization, declared 2015 as the International Year of Soils to raise awareness of the importance of soils for food security and essential ecosystem functions. Locally, the Department of Agriculture, through the Bureau of Soils and Water Management, is leading the Philippines' participation under the National Save Our Soils campaign. It encourages all stakeholders to take an active role in soil conservation and management. Napaka-importante sa atin na maging aktibo tayo sa implementation ng campaigns during the International Year of Soils, lalong-lalo na at ang Pilipinas ay isang agricultural country. We depend largely on soils for our produce or crops. The Philippines has 9.7 million hectares of agricultural land developed, and 2/3 of our population is directly or indirectly involved in farming in those lands. We are all stakeholders in soil conservation and management. Lahat tayo, no exemption, ay mga stakeholders sa usaping lupa dahil higit sa lahat nakasalalay dyan ang food security ng ating bansa. Because healthy soils are the foundation of food production. It sustains 95% of food production, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization. As FAO Director General Jose Graciano da Silva cited, we need healthy soils to achieve our food security and nutrition goals, to fight climate change, and to ensure overall sustainable development. We should be alarmed about the threats to healthy soils and take action in reversing those threats. Unang-una na diyan ang soil degradation na umabot na sa 33% globally at 38% here in the Philippines. Based on data from the Bureau of Soils and Water Management, out of the Philippines' total land area of 29.55 million hectares, 11.45 million hectares are vulnerable areas to land degradation or moderately to severely degraded, and 2.6 million hectares are hotspots or in an advanced stage of land degradation, and as such, priority areas for conservation measures. These degraded soil are in the sloping agricultural areas in the uplands, which are not practicing soil and water conservation measures and with substantially minimal vegetative cover, or those denuded forests, shrubs, and grasslands. Soil degradation is a threat globally. Every minute we lose the equivalent of 30 football pitches of fertile soil. The threat is even more alarming in Asia, according to FAO. Our regions need soil more than ever to satisfy the demand of the growing population. By 2050, we need to increase food production by at least 60% to meet the needs of an additional 2 billion more people. Around 95% of our food comes from the soil. Thus, it is imperative for us to save our soils, which is a renewable resource. It takes up to 1,000 years for just 1 centimeter of topsoil to form. Ang ilan sa mga dahilan ng pagkasira ng lupa ay erosion, acidification, chemical pollution, at iba pa. There is an urgent need to reduce soil degradation and restore o proseso. Iisa lang naman ang goal nating lahat ng mga iyan, ang preservation and conservation of our resources for the future generation. Katulad nga ng nasabi ko kanina, Maraming paraan at isa na dyan ang crop rotation at intercropping. Sa paglilibot namin ng Department of Agriculture sa mga lugar na nasalanta ng Bagyong Yolanda, nakita namin na ang mga coconut farmers, for instance, ay hindi pa pala pinapractice ang intercropping. So that's what we taught them to do dahil it takes between 6 to 9 years for coconut trees to reach full productivity. Matagal na panahon din at sayang naman kung during those years, wala silang harvest at source of income. Intercropping is included in Yolanda Recovery and Rehabilitation Project of DA and is being promoted by the Philippine Coconut Authority. Besides providing farmers with insurance against the risk of income loss during extreme weather conditions such as long dry spell or El Nino and typhoons, intercropping also maintains soil fertility since the nutrients flow from both layers of crop. It is also environment friendly as it is, promotes better soil and water conservation potential than monocropping. Consequently, it is also increasing soil biodiversity. Hindi lang sa food security importante ang soil. Alam natin na interconnected ang lahat sa ating nature. There is a chain reaction kapag hindi na-maintain ang balance at sustainability. Soils host a quarter of our planet's biodiversity. In the same way that we protect our oceans, we should also protect and save our soils. Organic farming also helps maintain the health of soil as it retains higher level of essential organic matter. And there is more to organic farming than reducing the use of pesticide. It also includes crop rotation at composting. Kung ang ating mga magsasaka, pati na rin ang mga gardeners or horticulturists ay matututo o magsishift into organic farming, malaking improvement ang makikita natin sa ating arable land at horticultural soils. Dapat natin pag-itingin ang campaign at information dissemination on organic farming. Actually, our country has a national organic agriculture program, which envisions the organic agriculture sector contributing to the overall agricultural growth and development of the country in terms of sustainability, competitiveness, and food security. Under the said program, at least 5% of Philippine agricultural farm will be converted into organic by 2016. And that is next year. Ako mismo ay advocate ng organic farming dahil ito ay kaakibat ng ating tinatawag na sustainable agriculture. Ang benepisyo nito ay long-term, lalo na sa ating environment. And as an environmentalist, importante sa akin yan. After all the natural disasters that have happened, environment protection should be of utmost consideration. Organic agriculture eliminates the use of synthetic or chemical-laden fertilizer and pesticides, and iba pa na nakakasira sa ating environment at ng fertility ng agricultural soil. Bukod sa harmful sa environment, ang inorganic pesticides at fertilizer ay mahal at nagpapaliit sa income ng mga farmers. Natutuwa ako na marami na ang nagpo-produce ng organic fertilizer. Ako mismo ay meron organic fertilizer making enterprises sa aking home city ng Las Piñas. We use rotary composter and vermicomposting sa ang aming ginagamit. We build composting centers in all our cities barangay to convert kitchen and garden waste into organic fertilizer. There are 60 composted distributed in the city, which presently serve 30,000 households. We target to install additional composter to service 50,000 households. We produce 55 tons of organic fertilizer, and that we distribute to the this management of soils is also linked to poverty reduction, hunger eradication, economic growth, and mental protection. Dito lang sa Pilipinas, more than 2/3 of our population are involved in agriculture, at majority sa kanila ay mahihirap na mga magsasaka. Healthy soils will not only provide us abundant and nutritious food, but will also increase the farm yield. With abundant harvest, the economy ngayong International Year of the Soil sa mga activities at advocacies to save our soils. This is for our own benefit, especially the future generation. May ongoing exhibit at scheduled seminars and DA at ang Bureau of Soil and Water Management throughout the year para sa mga interesado. The Senate Committee on Agriculture, we can all help in the information drive and in our own way adapt in our household, garden or farms, environment in the information drive, and in our own way adapt in our household, garden, whatever mankind does, even when we produce the most marvelous work of art, we depend on a few drops of water and 10 centimeters of soil. And let me end this privileged speech with another quote that serves as my inspiration or motto: environmental advocacy efforts. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Thank you, esteemed colleagues, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Villar. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, Senator Lauren Legarda wishes to comment.
Senator Legarda is recognized. If Senator Villar will yield.
I know we borrow it from our children.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to associate myself with a good senator from Las Piñas, for the very timely message on saving our soils, it being the Save Our Soils year, and last year being the farm school,
The year of the family farm
year from the FAO. And I'm happy to note that there is a priority given now to soil preservation, conservation, and rehabilitation. And I learned from the exhibit, which we opened earlier with a good chairman of the Environment Committee, that at least 1/3 of the existing agricultural land needs to be rehabilitated. That is the reason why I believe that the issue that Your Honor had discussed lengthily and comprehensively is so important, especially in the light of many of our environmental programs, which should also converge with the issue of food security. And I'm therefore referring to the National Greening Program of the DNR, which should also take into consideration the soil status of those areas where they plant those trees, whether for poverty alleviation projects or for reforestation. My simple question, therefore, to Your Honor is, perhaps the FAO and the Bureau of Soils of the DA and the DNR can meet so that there could be a soil mapping, which you mentioned to me earlier, of areas which are being planted both by the government and private entities, so that not only the right kind of tree species and agriculture species should be planted, but the kind of soil should also be assessed for the right kind of tree species. Is that possible, Madam Senator?
Madam Senator, from the Chairman of the Committee on Environment and Climate Change, we'll be very happy to work with you so that we can form a program by which our committees and the respective department, DNR and DA, to join together to protect our soils. And I would like also to ask for your help. We're trying to demand or ask the Bureau of Soil and Water Management to produce whatever soil mapping they have finished and to publish it, so we will know which part of the country na wala pang soil mapping, so that in our next budget, we can make provisions that we will finish the soil mapping of the Philippines so that we can be guided what to do in areas that we need to conserve so that we can produce more agricultural products in the future and at the same preserve our environment.
Thank you. May I just be enlightened, Senator Cynthia, of the 30 million hectares of the Philippine archipelago, how many hectares or what percentage of that is agriculture land? And you mentioned that 38% of that agriculture land is already eroded soil.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
my information accurate?
Yes. I think we have more than almost 30 million hectares of land in
Yes.
the Philippines. And then the one developed for agriculture is about 1/3, around 10 million, 11 million.
Okay, of
And
the
of
11.
that 11 million, 38% are degraded.
Okay. I am more familiar with deforested areas, of areas in our oceans where there's coral bleaching and degraded corals, and of watersheds which are degraded, and of waterways and oceans which need rehabilitation. I am not very familiar with soil which is degraded. That's why I'm very much interested in your speech, and I'm glad that you had put this on the table today. So, the 3 million hectares which you said are eroded soil, or soil which needs rehabilitation. Ang simpleng katanungan ko po ay, may pag-asa pa pa po na ito ay magamit para sa mga magsasaka, para sa food security, at ano po ang inyong alam na proseso na ginagawa po ng ating Department of Agriculture para ito ay magamit ng muli?
Ang pinakamaganda daw method to restore degradable land would be to convert our kitchen waste into organic fertilizer and use it to enhance yung degradable land. So, yun ang daw ang the best. And according to statistics, 28% of all the food produced in the world are wasted. And if we can convert this 28% to compost and then put the compost into our soil, then the best way to rehabilitate our soil. So,
Very
napaka-importante po nung
Yeah.
composting pala sa atin. Kaya we should encourage that all our waste, our kitchen
Composted.
waste and garden waste to be composted.
That is the most exciting thing I've heard today,
Yes.
Senator Cynthia. Because yan po ang buod ng Republic Act 9003, the Ecological Solid Waste Management Law of Composting, Recycling, ng batas po na yan, nung 2001 pa, na ang ating kinakain na kaunting tirang bigas, at kung merong balat ng sibuyas, o ng tirang saging, o ng buto ng papaya, yan po ay tinatapon nga balik sa soil. So, nature back to nature.
Yes.
And actually, just like what you're doing in Las Piñas, just like what I'm doing in my home, I dug a hole, and my food waste goes to that simple hole, and I put the dried leaves there so that it is not just food waste that's a bit wet, and in 2 to 3 months, that's already organic compost, which we can use for our plants around us. Actually, maski walang mga lugar, ay pwedeng sa mga batya o sa mga maliliit na paso. And so, you're correct in saying first that there's so much waste. Sabi po nyo ay 28%. Napakaraming
waste.
sayang. At yung 28% na ito ay maaring gamitin sa organic fertilizer. So we really see the cycle of nature going back to nature.
At ang maganda po sa Metro Manila, if they can recycle food waste and kitchen waste and garden waste, it's so expensive to throw garbage in Metro Manila. For us to bring 1 truck of garbage to the landfill, it costs us 9,000 per truck. Imagine how much you can save, and still, you produce organic compost, and then that compost will help preserve the degradable soil.
That's exactly what the solid waste management law is all about. And I hope that you can help this representation in enlightening local governments to do exactly as you said, which is to recycle and put back to the soil the food waste that we do, and everything else that cannot be recycled, and only therefore a small percentage would go to the landfill if necessary. Yes.
I'm asking the National Organic Program in the Department of Agriculture to provide lahat ng may gusto ng composter, especially the public market all over the Philippines, so that they can recycle their kitchen waste, and then that would be all organic fertilizer to be given away to our farmers to improve our soil. So we're doing that. We're very serious in doing that, and I hope the Senate will support that program.
I would support that program and would also support your program for a complete soil mapping of our country, so that our farmers also can be guided on how to increase their yield and to rehabilitate their soil. There's much more that I could discuss, but we already talked about it in private.
Yeah.
And perhaps our committees jointly can meet so that both the FAO and the DA, along with the DNR and the Climate Change Committee, because the issue of climate change and the degradation of our soil and resources of our soil are interconnected as well. So I thank you for bringing this to national attention, and we will regarding this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Senator, and also thank you very much to our President. Thank you.
Mr. President, I move that we refer the speech of Senator Villar and the interpellations of Senator De Garda primarily to the Committee on Agriculture and Food and secondarily to the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources.
So referred.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we recognize Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to speak on a matter of public interest.
Senator Marcos is recognized on an issue of public interest.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, good afternoon. I rise today to speak on a matter of profound importance to the national interest. I stand before you in the name of peace. Like our Muslim and Christian brothers, our Lumads, and our indigenous people, I too long for peace, an equitable, enduring peace. Peace with justice, peace with honor, peace for all. I have walked the proverbial extra mile in search of peace, peace in Mindanao, peace in the land. When Senate Bill number 2408 was filed and subsequently referred to my committee in September of last year, we endeavored to scrutinize the proposal by conducting several hearings on the Bangsamoro Basic Law. We sought the opinions, sentiments, concerns, and propositions of the different sectors of society. Discussions of the measure at the grassroots level triggered passionate debates and scholarly discourses between national and local officials, members of the academe, concerned sectors, and other stakeholders. We also sought the opinions of legal experts who shared their scholarly analyses on the constitutionality of several provisions of the bill. In all, our committees have conducted 14 public hearings, 9 in the Senate and 5 in the affected areas of Cotabato, Marawi, Tawi-Tawi, Sulu, and Zamboanga. 8 months have passed since the time the bill was filed in September. This morning, we just conducted the 14th hearing on the BBL. The Bangsamoro Basic Law is supposed to be an instrument of peace. I share in its objective. But for peace to be achieved, the BBL must be inclusive. All the stakeholders must be consulted, their views heard, their concerns addressed. More importantly, it must conform to the letter and spirit of the law of the land. No ifs, ands, or buts. Unfortunately, the BBL in its present form and substance will not bring us any closer to peace. Instead, it will lead us to perdition. Armed conflict will ensue. Blood will be shed. And when blood is shed, it will not distinguish between right and wrong, between young and old, neither between men and women, nor soldiers or rebels, combatants and civilians, rich, poor, Muslims, Christians. Nobody wins. Everybody loses. After a series of meetings with the stakeholders, it became obvious to me that no substantive consultations had been held with them prior to or during negotiations. The Office of the Presidential Assistant on the Peace Process totally ignored the major stakeholders: the Sultanate of Sulu, the Moro National Liberation Front, the Lumads, the indigenous people, the Christians, the local government units, and businesses were abandoned, removed from the negotiating process. And so, Mr. President, I will not invite your boredom by repeating all those contentious findings which have found their way to the media. I would like instead to express some of my reservations with regard to the proposed BBL so as to give the Filipino people an idea of how complicated or even convoluted it is and why this committee has deep reservations on the wisdom of the BBL. Soon after the commencement of the committee hearings, speculation on the constitutionality of the BBL began to surface. These speculations ripened into substantial findings, which first had to be addressed before a comprehensive understanding of the BBL was to be had. Thus, we were constrained to seek the opinion of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes, chaired by Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago. As stated in the closely argued and erudite committee report of Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, who we all acknowledge is a great legal luminary of the Senate, the report, which was transmitted to the Committee on Local Government on 26 May 2015, the following findings were made. It is the committee's understanding that the establishment of the proposed BBL ought to be within the constitutional framework in order to establish an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. That is to say, the proposed BBL should and could only create a territorial and political subdivision of the Republic of the Philippines, which is our sovereign state. However autonomous it may be, its autonomy does not and cannot make it higher than or co-equal with the whole. Section 15, Article 10 of the 1987 Constitution states, and I quote, "There shall be created autonomous regions in Muslim Mindanao within the framework of this Constitution and the national sovereignty, as well as territorial integrity of the Republic of the Philippines." The BBL, however, aspires to create a part-sovereign state that enjoys sovereignty within the Bangsamoro territory and within the territory of the state. It seeks to create what our Supreme Court has called an imperium et imperium, which is a state within a state. This notion has been squarely rejected by our Supreme Court time and again. Stated otherwise, the BBL and what it aspires to create is not within the framework of the Constitution because the powers enjoyed by the Bangsamoro government alone are violative of several provisions of the 1987 Constitution. First, it provides for three categories of powers. One, a limited number reserved to central or national government. Two, an extensive number of exclusive powers that may only be enjoyed by the Bangsamoro government. And three, concurrent powers that may be shared by both central government and Bangsamoro government within the Bangsamoro territory. Second, the granting of these exclusive powers to the Bangsamoro government implies that the central government recognizes another and more supreme authority within the state, an anomaly which is not authorized by the Constitution. Several other provisions run counter to our Constitution. One, BBL provides for a parliamentary form of government within a presidential form of government. There is no constitutional basis for this effort to change the form of government. The proposed BBL provides for a parliamentary form of government for the Bangsamoro. It vests the power of government in a parliament headed by a chief minister who shall concurrently head the executive department called the cabinet. The members of the parliament are to be elected by the constituents of the Bangsamoro, but it is the members of the parliament themselves who shall elect the chief minister, who shall in turn appoint his deputy minister and a majority of the members of the cabinet. Number two, BBL seeks to establish limitations to the powers of Congress. Congress will be entitled to reserve powers, but the Bangsamoro would be excluded from the laws passed by Congress with respect to autonomous regions. The Bangsamoro Parliament would become not subordinate to, but equal with our Congress. The BBL contains the categories of powers contractually stipulated upon between the MILF and OPAP. And again, I quote, "The Philippines is a democratic and republican state. Sovereignty resides in the people, and all government authority emanates from them. Therefore, there is no doubt that the Philippine government has all the powers of sovereignty, except only those given to autonomous regions in the Constitution. In contrast, under the BBL, the Bangsamoro government may enact pieces of legislation on the exploration, development, utilization of mines and minerals in its territory, draft policies on mining and other extractive industries, and recommend to the President applications for financial and technical assistance agreements. These are measures that fall exclusively within the powers of Congress to legislate under the Constitution. By giving the Bangsamoro government the power to legislate on these subjects, the BBL equates the Bangsamoro Parliament with Congress. Number 3, exclusive powers given to the Bangsamoro will inevitably reduce or diminish the comprehensive sovereign authority of the Republic over the so-called Bangsamoro territory and the population thereof. What is given to the Bangsamoro government is necessarily torn away from the government of the Republic. Section 3, Article 5 of the BBL enumerates no less than 58 powers that are exclusively given to the Bangsamoro government. I must agree with the observation of Dean Merlin Magallona of UP Law that since the exclusivity of these powers necessarily implies that these are to be exercised to the exclusion of the national government, or the central government as it is referred to in the BBL, the only governing authority will be the Bangsamoro government. If that is the case, how then will the Bangsamoro government be able to implement and enforce some of these exclusive powers? To cite some examples, the creation of sources of revenue, which necessarily include the power to tax all qualified persons within the territory. Would a revenue sharing scheme apply to the Bangsamoro government as in all other local government units under our local government code? Or would the central government continue to give internal revenue allotments without receiving a just share of the revenues received from within the Bangsamoro territory? Under labor, employment, and occupation, during our previous hearings, various stakeholders expressed concerns on how the Bangsamoro legislation could be reconciled with a person's right to security of tenure, or even their constitutional right against non-impairment of contracts. Bangsamoro Police, in the exercise of its right to establish or create institutions, policies, and laws for the general welfare of the people within the Bangsamoro territory, the Bangsamoro government can create its own police force. In the exercise of this right, there can be no recognition of the central government's authority over said police force, unlike the central government's PNP, which is under the supervision and control of the DILG and ultimately the President. What then will prevent the Bangsamoro police from turning into someone's private army? Indeed, these exclusive powers go beyond anything ever granted by the Constitution or any other piece of legislation to any local government unit or autonomous region. Number 4, BBL refers to the autonomous region as a territory and as the ancestral homeland. BBL has no power to create the Bangsamoro territory, which proceeds from the view that although Bangsamoro is under Philippine jurisdiction, it can be molded into a separate territory of the Philippines. Article 1, Section 1 of the 1987 Constitution provides the following, and I quote, "The national territory comprises the Philippine archipelago with all the islands and waters embraced therein and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction." Close quote. The phrase "other territories" refers to other territories over which the Philippines has claim. For example, Sabah. It must be pointed out that the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao under the Constitution is part of the Philippines territory. To call the region, including the present arm, Bangsamoro territory, is to imply that it is a separate part of the Philippines, which is not the case. The reality is that the Republic of the Philippines recognizes certain areas are occupied by ethnic groups, for which reason the state under Constitution allows the creation of autonomous regions. In a 2008 case, the Supreme Court held that the concept of association is not recognized under the present Constitution. The Court opined, and again I quote, "The Constitution, however, does not contemplate any state in this jurisdiction other than the Philippine state. Much less does it provide for a transitory status that aims to prepare any part of the Philippine territory for independence." Close quote. Furthermore, and because of the way our national territory is defined and as an element of its national sovereignty, the 1987 Constitution provides that all lands of public domain, waters, minerals, coal, petroleum, and other mineral oils, all sources of potential energy, fisheries, forests, or timber, wildlife, flora, and other natural resources are owned by the state. Accordingly, the exploration, development, and utilization of natural resources shall be under the full control and supervision of the state. Despite this clear mandate under the Constitution, inland waters, Bangsamoro waters, ancestral domain, natural resources, protected areas, fishery, marine, and aquatic resources are all within the extensive, exclusive powers of the Bangsamoro government. This extraordinary power over natural resources found within the Bangsamoro territory and granted to the Bangsamoro government runs counter to the very definition of the national territory and the state's ownership and control over all natural resources found within Philippine territory. And there are other substantial issues and questions of policy. At hindi natatapos ang debate ukol sa BBL sa mga konstitusyonal na kwestiyon na ito. Once the issue of modality of making the BBL legally enforceable is settled, deliberation shall ultimately center on the specific provisions of the BBL. More importantly, discussion shall ascend to a debate on the higher questions of national policy. Aside from those earlier mentioned, other controversial points and serious concerns have been raised in the course of our hearings, such as the rather flexible Bangsamoro territory, owing to the vague and loose opt-in and inclusion mechanism, the possible conflicting rights and claims over exclusive and internal bodies of waters like the Sulu Sea and Lake Lanao, co-equal rights of indigenous peoples, as well as of the royal houses and sultanates living within the Bangsamoro territory, the business and economic implications, not just on the Bangsamoro territory, but on adjacent LGUs and on the wider Mindanao community, separate taxing authority, which can be susceptible to double taxation, operational control over the Bangsamoro police, impact on our other LGUs in light of our evolving policy on devolution of powers to local governments, energy implications not only in the Bangsamoro territory but in the whole of Mindanao, which is already beleaguered by power shortages, a separate commission on elections, commission on audit, civil service commission, implications on previous relevant peace agreements and documents that are binding upon our government, and many more. In our attempt to create and install the Bangsamoro government, we are of necessity faced with the proposal to repeal Congress's previous enactments, Republic Act numbers 9054 and 6734, or our previous laws creating the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. What is the wisdom behind repealing these important laws under the BBL as opposed to just improving them? Are we to just accept the claim that ARM was but a failed experiment, as though Congress's previous efforts had all been for naught? As an optimist and a believer in our capacity as a nation, it could be said that the ARM is an experiment that is on the difficult but promising path of discovering the perfect conclusion and the solution to the problem. And in the event that we do decide to abolish the ARM, how do we protect the interests and welfare of its 36,000 civil servants who will be without work after the ARM is rendered functus officio? We cannot keep on conducting isolated experiments on the development of our people all the time. Rather, we should improve on our previous efforts by applying the wisdom gained from our experience and from our previous shortcomings. All these issues must be carefully studied and duly presented to our people, not only reasonably prior to enacting the BBL, but more importantly, prior to subjecting our people to the routine and perfunctory process of a plebiscite. as responsible and conscientious legislators, we are bound by constitutional and moral duty to carefully deliberate on the wisdom of the provisions of the BBL, all 119 of them, with a view to laying down a clear and effective legislative policy for our autonomous regions, in accordance with our Constitution. Our success in this particularly Herculean task could lay the basis for the development of our local government system, as well as a blueprint for our other autonomous regions under the Constitution, the Cordilleras. Given the complexities on the constitutionality of the BBL, not to mention the other debatable parts of the proposed law, I am at a loss as to why we are being pressured to sign off on this important piece of legislation. Binigyan di umano kami ng deadline ng palasyo. Kailangan daw namin maipasa ang BBL sa aking committee bago mag-June 11. In light of the grant of extensive powers being given to the Bangsamoro government, as well as the plethora of alarming issues attendant to the proposed BBL, how can our electorates possibly come to terms with this complex piece of legislation, which will obviously have serious implications on our lives, our economy, and on the future of our country, if arbitrary deadlines are continuously being imposed? Lord Chesterfield once said, "If someone is in a hurry, it only shows that the thing being rushed is too big for him." Hindi po tayo magpapadala sa emosyon at sa politika. Hindi ako makakapapayag na ma-railroad ang BBL sa aking committee. It is complex enough as it is. Why rush it? I will not be rushed. I will see to it that any peace agreement we fashion with the MILF will be inclusive. I will make sure that Mindanao or any part of our republic will not secede from us. I will stand my ground so that our country is not dismembered. I will do whatever it takes to help achieve an enduring and equitable peace in Mindanao. Hindi po ako tumatakbo sa responsibilidad o sa anumang problema. Hinaharap ko ang hamon ng panahon. Bilang isang halal ng bayan, mayroon akong pananagutan sa taong bayan. I cannot and I will not fail the people who are looking at us for deliverance. I will do my duty as a senator. I will do the right thing. Mr. President, I repeat, I am for peace. I share our people's thirst for peace. Pero napakarami pong mga komplikado at kontrobersyal na probisyon na napapaloob sa BBL. At kung tatanggalin pong isa-isa, baka maski kahit ano pang retoke ang gawin, hindi na makakaya pang maibalik sa orihinal na anyo ng BBL. Kinausap ko ang lahat ng stakeholders. Iisa lang ang kanilang hatol. Hindi ito magbibigay ng kapayapaan. Mr. President, I cannot support the BBL in its present form. May inahanda ako na kapalit dito para makabubuti sa lahat. Manalangin tayo para sa linaw ng kaisipan at tapang ng kalooban. Huwag tayong matakot gawin ang tama para sa kapayapaan at sa pagkakaisa ng bayan. I cannot end without paying tribute to our fallen 44 and those before them who had offered their lives at the altar of service, of duty. I salute you for your bravery and your patriotism. Your heroism will not be forgotten. You will remain in the collective memory of a grateful nation and people. Your sacrifices will continue to inspire us. I shall not stop until you and your loved ones are given the justice that you all richly deserve. I will continue the search for peace, even if it means traveling that dark, treacherous road alone. By doing that, I, in my own small way, would have helped demonstrate that your supreme sacrifice did not go to waste and that you have not died in vain. May the good Lord help us all, and may He save us from the evil that men bring upon themselves. Maraming salamat po. Thank you, Mr. President.
The audience is requested not to clap their hands. Silence, please. Senator Soto is recognized.
Mr. President, will the distinguished gentleman from Ilocos Norte yield to some questions, Mr. President?
Certainly, Mr. President. Gladly to the gentleman from Quezon City.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, allow me to associate myself with most of the expressions you placed on record, most especially the want for peace. We all want lasting peace, not peace found in the Memorial Park. So allow me to scratch the paint a little, Mr. President, with a few questions. I plan to wait for your committee report, and apparently it will be a substitute committee report or substitute bill, the way you sounded towards the end of your speech. So I will wait for that. But in the meantime, just to clarify some of the questions running in my mind also, Mr. President, let me begin with recalling what you said about the number of hearings that you conducted. You conducted 14 hearings.
As of today, Mr.
as of
President,
today.
we have conducted 14 hearings, both in the Senate and out of town.
And there was a list of groups that you consulted and you heard in the hearings, like the Lumads, etc., etc. Can you enumerate these groups again, Mr. President?
Well, we first went to the different areas which we considered to be affected, both inside the present arm and outside. We usually in the areas that are next to it or had been proposed as being part of the contiguous territory to the Bangsamoro Core territory. And so, but we found that there had been a shortcoming in the process conducted by OPAP, in that they had not conducted any consultations with business. They had not conducted consultations with the IPs, with the Christians, with the MNLF, with the local government units. And so we tried to remedy that situation and made the hearings here in the Senate with those groups.
Did they talk to the Lumads? No.
Yes, yes, certainly we had.
No.
They came in. I think the hearing that we had last week.
Do I recall it right that during your hearings they said they were not consulted?
They were not. That
They
is
were
what
not
they
even
said.
heard during the House hearings, House of Representatives hearings. The Maranaos, the Lumads.
No, they were not. The LGUs were asked to come for the House. What I was referring to in the lack of consultation was the lack of consultation in the process of negotiating. Ganito ang naging problema. Ang harap lamang ay ang OPAP at saka ang MILF. Sila lang ang dalawang grupong nagsasalita. Ngunit ang MILF ay tumatanggap na representative ng lahat na ng Muslim Mindanao. Ang sinasabi naman ng ibang grupo, hindi namin sila kinikilala bilang representative.
Hindi sila ino-authorize?
Hindi namin sila binibigyan. We do not, tinanong namin directly, do you recognize or did you authorize anyone in the MILF to be your representative? And unanimously, they said no. They did not authorize or recognize the representation of the MILF for their group in the negotiations with the OPAP. Kaya't sila'y nagpapasalamat na binigyan ng magpagkakataon sa unang pagkakataon na sila'y makapagsalita at bigkasin ang kanilang mga opinion.
Doon sa inyong committee?
Doon
dito sa Senado?
Sa committee natin.
Sa Senado?
Tama po,
What
Mr.
about the
President.
committee in the House of Representatives, Mr. President?
Ang sa pag-unawa ko ay the only group of that group, the list of groups that I mentioned were the LGUs were consulted
The
in the
LGUs,
House.
but the rest were not. The
rest-
Lumads, the Maranaos,
the rest were
the
not.
Tausugs.
I believe certainly the Tausugs certainly not. Because the Sultanate of Sulu, to add to that list, the Sultanates were not also, the royal houses were also not consulted. There were no consultations on the basis of tribes. So yes, the Tausugs were certainly not consulted because, and that is again, the question is how is it that the the MILF, which is essentially Maguindanao and Maranao, MILF, were representing the Tausugs when they had themselves had no representation. The question that was asked also by the Sultanate of Sulu, ang tanong nila iba pa. Sabi nila, bakit yung kumuha ng kanilang lupa, why is the entity that took their land away when they were in the West also involved in taking their land away in the East? They were referring to Malaysia. Because kinuha ang kanilang ang North Borneo, ngayon kinukuha ang ibang parte na kasama sa Sultanate of Sulu. At yun ang mga tanong. At hindi nga nila naisabi lahat ito dahil hindi sila linapitan ng OPAP ng proseso ng negosasyon.
The House of Representatives conducted 50 hearings, I overheard. They were announcing that, as a matter of fact, Mr. President. But in the 50 hearings, none of these groups that you mentioned were called in the hearings, and
I can be quite certain and categorical in saying that is what when we had them at the hearings and we asked them if this had been the first opportunity for them to speak, they again unanimously said yes. The reason we asked them to come is because lumapit sila sa amin at sinabi hindi pa kami nakakapagsalita. Kasama naman kami dyan, stakeholders kami, ngunit hindi kami binigyan ng pagkakataon na magsabi kung ano man ang kanilang iniisip, ano ang kanilang mga concerns, ano ang kanilang mga, sa palagay nila, ang mga dapat gawin dito sa BBL.
all right. Let me go to the framework nitong BBL na bill na sinubmit sa House of Representatives and dito rin po sa atin. Ano po naging basis nito? There was an agreement first between the OPAP and the MILF. Ganun po ba?
There were two agreements. First was the framework agreement on Bangsamoro, which we always refer to now as the FAB. And then following was the comprehensive agreement on Bangsamoro, the CAB. At ang naging bunga ng CAB ay yung draft BBL na ibinigay sa atin sa Kongreso.
Itong two agreements na to, kumbaga binding, parang ganon, sa dalawang grupo na nag-usap. Sa grupo ng gobyerno at saka sa grupo ng MILF.
Well, nagpirmahan na sila at yung napagkaisahan na nila ang yung mga iba't ibang provision doon sa agreement na yan.
So parang kontrata itong pinirmahan nila.
Napirmahan na yung kontrata, the agreement has been signed, it is official, and that is why it is on that basis that the draft BBL was written and submitted to Congress.
Ito po bang mga agreement na pirmado na to, ito po ba yung mga nakapirma mga alias? Ito po ba yun?
Yung iba doon, at least nakakaalam tayo na sa testimony na ibinigay nung napag-usapan yung mga alias ay tatlo doon sa kung maalala ko na, if I could remember correctly, tatlo doon, at least three
sa mga pumirma
na nasa MILF negotiating panel ay gumagamit ng alias.
So ang
pinangungunahan ni Chairman Iqbal.
Ang ipinirma nila ay alias.
Ang pinirma nila ang kanilang alias.
Well, let me pick your mind then, Mr. President. Do you have a daughter or a son?
I have three sons, Mr. President.
Okay, if your son's going to get married, will you allow your son to the wife to be of your son to sign an alias in the marriage contract?
I don't think that will nullify the contract because the person signing is not who they purport to be. So no, I would not allow it.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer, Mr. President, because it shows there is really something. There is a big problem in the so-called agreements that started the framework for or the basis for the bill. Now, this is my opinion. I am quite uncomfortable with the use of the term central government referring to the government of the Philippines. Ano po ba ibig nila sabihin doon sa BBL? Bakit tinatawag na central government? Pag sinabing central government, ibig sabihin merong ibang government.
Yun na nga, kaya meron na rin nagtataka kung tayo, pag pinag-uusapan natin ang gobyerno ng Pilipinas, ang tinutukoy natin, ang ginagamit nating salita, national government. But in the BBL, they constantly refer to the government of the Republic of the Philippines as the central government, which raises the question, which the gentleman I believe is heading towards, does that mean that they are another government separate from from the central government? They are just not in the center of government, but they are a government separate from the central government, and therefore not part of the national government. These are some of the issues that have been raised, and with the explanation that has been given us, it just, at the very least, it bears a great deal of study and clarification in the final language of the Senate version of the BBL.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. President, because that means my apprehension is correct, and there are larger implications in calling the national government a central government. And again, I wish to thank the gentleman for allowing me to scratch the paint, so to speak. I will await the committee report that your committee will be coming up with after you're done with the hearings. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. We hope that we have the assistance and participation of the minority floor leader and all the other senators when it comes to writing that committee report and when the proposed amendments are finally finalized. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I move that we refer Senator Marcos's speech primarily to the Committee on Local Government and secondarily to the Committee on Peace, Unification, and Reconciliation. I so move.
Sorry for
Mr. President, we have guests from the DFA, the Department of Foreign Affairs Office of Legal Affairs, Assistant Secretary Eduardo Jose de Vega, Assistant Secretary Constancio Vigno, and Ana Placida Espina. I move that they be recognized.
We recognize our visitors from the DFA, and we make their presence part of the record in today's session.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2794 under Committee Report number 170. This is the anti-carnapping law from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
I move that we consider Senate Bill 2794 under Committee Report number 170 with the consent of the Senate.
In order.
I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Bill number 2794, an act providing for a new anti-carnapping law of the Philippines.
Move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Poe, Mr. President.
Senator Poe is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Mr. President, I rise this afternoon to sponsor Committee Report 170. The legislation is a consolidation of 6 bills and resolutions on anti-carnapping and similar issues filed by Senators Escudero, Trillanes, Defensor Santiago, and this representation. The committee report recognizes too the third reading version passed by the House of Representatives. The automotive industry, according to the Philippine Automotive Competitiveness Council, PACCI, is deemed an essential component of economic growth. PACCI recognizes the Philippine automotive manufacturing industry as one of the 8 sectors that has a huge potential for success in the world market. In 2014, the ASEAN Automotive Federation reported that Philippine sales of motor vehicles grew by 29%, from 181,738 units in 2013 to 234,747 units in 2014, making it the region's third best performer next to Vietnam and Singapore. For the first quarter of 2015 alone, the Philippine automotive industry continues to improve with a 22 percentage point growth based on the report of the Chamber of Automobile Manufacturers and Truck Manufacturers Association. The said statistics is a manifestation that consumer spending plays a big role in the country's economic growth. As we can see, the business end of the motor vehicle industry is booming and is of substantial help to our economy. So, sa mga ordinaryong mamamayan, ang pagkakaroon ng sasakyan ay kabuuan ng kanilang mga pangarap, pag-iipon at tagumpay. Ang bawat bumibili ng sasakyan ay may kanya-kanyang dahilan. Marami ay para mapaginhawa ang kanilang paglalakbay patungo sa trabaho o pagnenegosyo. Yung iba ay para pangsundo at panghatid ng mga anak sa eskwela. Maaari rin ang isang young professional ay bibili ng sasakyan para sa kanyang magulang o para sa kanyang sarili bilang reward, bilang indikasyon ng tagumpay. But the success in an industry is always matched by an equal threat. As discussed in our public hearing on the issue, the crime of carnapping continues to rear its ugly and evil head in the country. Not only have we seen an increase in the spate of carnapping incidents, but we have likewise been shaken by media reports on the senseless and gruesome murders as exemplified in the cases of Emerson Lozano, Hernanes Sensil, and Benson Evangelista. The statistics of the Philippine National Police is also relevant. From January to June 2014, 3,170 cases of carnapping were reported, up 68.5% from 1,881 cases reported in the same period in 2013. Again, that's up 68.5%. In the first half of 2014, the records of the Highway Patrol Group indicated that an average of 2 cars and 15 motorcycles were stolen on a daily basis in the Philippines, sometimes even as much as 4 cars a day. The following data are significant as the Chamber considers a new anti-carnapping law for the country. First, based on the report of the PNP-HPG, the most stolen vehicles in 2013 are the following: the Toyota Fortuner, Mitsubishi Montero, and the Vios accordingly. The reason is because these 3 are the most saleable in the market as second-hand vehicles. Next, about 150,000 motorcycles are stolen every week in Metro Manila alone, or an average of 21 cars per day, motorcycles per day. Next, according to a 2014 report from the then Office of the PNP-PIO Chief Superintendent Ruben Theodore Sindak, the HPG recovered 51.4% of stolen motor vehicles and only 2.6% of stolen motorcycles. There are a number of modus operandi operated by gangs and individuals sporadically, preying upon owners of private vehicles. Bundol Gang, Bukas Kotse Gang, Basag Kotse Gang, Basag Itlog, Basag Kamatis Gang, and the most popular modus, airport ambush and test drive threat. Mr. President, the present law of the Philippines addressing carnapping is circa 1972, although amended. Republic Act 6539, or the Anti-Carnapping Law, passed during the 7th Congress. The Senate President then was Senator Gil Puyat, in whose honor we have the entire Bondira Avenue named today, was enacted to curb theft of motor vehicles. Based on available data, cases of stolen vehicles range from 400 to 420 cars at a time. Times have indeed changed dramatically. It should be noted that substantial transformation in the economic landscape has happened, with more motor vehicles on the road, the presence of bolder criminal syndicates, and the evolution of motorcycle transport system. Acts have been more brazen too. In one situation, for example, the mastermind of a carnapping ring has reportedly been able to evade detention and post bail no less than 19 times posted bail, despite the numerous charges leveled against him. In short, carnapping has become more rampant, more blatant, and more heinous over the past years. It is now time to plug the loopholes in the law to adjust the economic requirements of the present and to stop the reign of terror of criminal syndicates engaged in carnapping. The highlights of the committee report. Senate Bill 2794 under Committee Report 170 is highlighted by the following provisions. Number 1, it provides stiffer penalties for carnapping or car theft. Any person who is found guilty of carnapping shall, regardless of the value of the motor vehicle taken, be punished by imprisonment of not less than 20 years and 1 day and not more than 30 years. When the carnapping is committed without violence against or intimidation of persons or force upon things, and by imprisonment for not less than 30 years and 1 day and not more than 40 years when the carnapping is committed by means of violence against or intimidation of any person or force upon things. The present law only provides for 14 to 17 years imprisonment. Number 2, under the measure, any person charged with carnapping shall be denied bail when the evidence of guilt is strong, or when the crime of carnapping is committed by a group, gang, or syndicate, or when attended by violence and intimidation or forced upon things, or when the owner, driver, occupant, or passenger is killed or raped. Number 3, while the definition of carnapping is the same in both the 1972 law and the proposed bill, there are new violations or offenses considered in the proposed law. A. Identity transfer. The act of transferring the entire number, chassis, body tag, and all other identifying marks of a motor vehicle. This is cannibalizing in the present lingo. B. The so-called kambal registration or double registration. C. Unlawful use of vehicle plates. D. The act of replacing original serial numbers or motor vehicle engines, engine blocks, or chassis as a means of furthering carnapping. The rationale, to cover new modus operandi like the lipat bahay modus operandi, wherein the working or sizable parts inside the carnap vehicle engine are transferred inside the engine block of a legitimate motor vehicle, often previously declared as a total wreck. Carnapping is still defined as the taking with intent to gain of a motor vehicle belonging to another without the latter's consent, or by means of violence against or intimidation of persons, or by using force upon things. Number 4, coordination amongst PNP, HPG, LTO, Customs, DOTC, Marina, and other relevant offices is strengthened, especially in easy online access and registration to expedite motor vehicle data, details, and verification. Number 5, the PNP HPG is given the main task on all concerns involving carnapping and measures to forestall it. LTO as the focal point for motor vehicle registration. Number 6, the immediate return of carnap vehicles to the lawful owner is warranted under the new code, regardless of whether one is a buyer of good faith upon demand by the registered owner or his duly authorized representatives. The stolen motor vehicle must be returned to the rightful owner and legal owner within 72 hours from demand. Number 7, to avert the widely illegal acts of mounting motor vehicle engines to motor boats, motor bankas, watercrafts, and other light water vessels, the applicant shall secure a permit from the PNP HPG. Mr. President, I appeal for the Philippine Senate's favorable consideration in this regard. Ipasa po natin ang panukalang ito dahil makakatulong ito sa pagsugpo ng krimen, ng carnapping na marami na pong nabibiktima. Gayun din, ito ay napapanahon na para mabigyan proteksyon natin ang ating mga sasakyan at lalong-lalo na ang ating mga kababayan. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2794 under Committee Report number 170.
So suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 4889 under Committee Report number 171. This is the bill to define the maritime zones of the Philippines from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. I so move.
So transferred.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 4889 under Committee Report number 171.
In order.
With the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Number 4889, an act defining the maritime zones of the Republic of the Philippines.
Mr. President, I move for recognition of this representation to deliver the sponsorship speech as the Vice Chair in lieu of Senator Miriam Santiago.
The acting majority leader is recognized to sponsor the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm here to sponsor this act as the Vice Chair of the Committee of Foreign Affairs, as instructed by Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, our Chairman for the Committee on Foreign Relations. So, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, your Committee on Foreign Relations has the honor to sponsor Committee Report Number 171 on House Bill 4899, recommending its approval with amendments taking into consideration Senate Bills 39 and 174. This is the Maritime Zones Bill, Mr. President. Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution defines our country's national territory. It includes, number 1, the Philippine Archipelago, number 2, all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction, and 3, the territorial sea, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves and other submarine areas corresponding to the Philippine Archipelago and all other territories over which the Philippines has jurisdiction, which likewise consist of terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains. The national territory was likewise defined in the 1935 and 1973 constitutions. Common to all the three constitutions is our country's adherence to the archipelagic principle, which under our Constitution is embodied as follows. The waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimensions, form part of the internal waters of the Philippines. Our country ratified the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, or the UNCLOS, on August 5, 1984, with a declaration that the signing of the convention by the government of the Philippines shall not in any manner impair or prejudice the sovereign rights of the Republic under and arising from the Constitution, nor nullify or impair the sovereignty of the Philippines as an archipelagic state over the sea lanes, and do not deprive it of authority to enact legislation to protect its sovereignty, independence, and security. Which brings us to Republic Act number 9522, enacted in 2009, otherwise known as the Philippine Archipelagic Baselines Law. This measure effectively made our baselines compliant with the UNCLOS, to which we are a state party. With the passage of RA number 9522, Republic Act 9522, the Philippines declared itself as an archipelagic state and indicated that it would define its maritime zones. This is a right we bear under the UNCLOS. Mr. President, we seek to exercise this right through the foregoing measure. Simply, the proposed bill is a general declaration of the maritime zones under Philippine jurisdiction. It defines the following: internal waters, archipelagic waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and continental shelf. It mentions in general terms the rights that the Philippines as sovereign may exercise over these maritime zones. The bill claims the maximum extent of the territorial sea, which is 12 nautical miles, and the contiguous zone, 24 nautical miles. Under the UNCLOS, the extent of these two maritime zones has to be claimed by the archipelagic or coastal state, given that they are not automatically accorded to the state. This is unlike the EEZ or EEZ and the so-called juridical continental shelf. The foregoing Maritime Zones Bill seeks to enable the country to maximize the rights and benefits to maritime areas and resources accorded to a coastal state under the Philippine Constitution and international law, particularly UNCLOS. By this bill, the Philippines would establish its own domestic legal framework on the maritime areas under its jurisdictions and would notify the international community of its maritime zones and the extent of its maritime jurisdictions. The establishment of the Philippine Maritime Zones under UNCLOS would enable the country to now negotiate effectively with some of its neighbors where it has overlapping maritime claims to demarcate boundaries. It bears noting that the Philippines has overlapping maritime jurisdictions with Indonesia, Palau, and Japan. Thus, demarcation of maritime boundaries with our neighbors would help promote better relations with these countries. Additionally, a clear demarcation of the country's maritime territory and jurisdiction would enable effective implementation of the country's maritime laws by government agencies, such as those involved in law enforcement, fisheries, and natural resources management. And a strong domestic law regime may become an effective foundation for economic growth. For instance, a 2009 OSAID study found that for some Pacific Island states, including French Polynesia, Cook Islands, the Solomon Islands, and Fiji, declaring maritime zones, which entails some cost, could redound in benefits amounting to as much as $103 million over the next 20 years, for example, through better management of marine resources. Without such a declaration, Mr. President, we effectively send out, to borrow the words of a Supreme Court decision, an open invitation to the seafaring powers to freely enter and exploit the resources in the waters and submarine areas around our archipelago, and effectively weaken the country's case in any international dispute over Philippine maritime space. No less than Confucius said, "The strength of a nation derives from the integrity of the home." When we cannot even define how far out into the sea our home extends, by what measure then can we even begin to determine and build up our capabilities to protect it? Paano nga naman maproprotektahan at pauunlarin ang bahay kung kapag hindi klaro kung saan ang bakuran nito? Finally, Mr. President, in terms of its standing on various international issues, including issues vital to its national interests, such as the West Philippine Sea, harmonizing its domestic laws with international law will send a strong signal that the Philippines strictly adheres to a rules-based approach in state-to-state relations. Under the UNCLOS, the declaration of a 200 nautical mile EEZ or EEZ is afforded to state parties, whether small or large, weak or powerful. Indeed, such rules-based approach keeps the anarchy of nations peaceful rather than chaotic. Mutual respect, not mutual apprehension, becomes prevalent in state-to-state relations. Mr. President, the motivation for passing this bill is not merely to harmonize Philippine law with public international law, in this instance the UNCLOS, but clearly doing so is also in the very best interest of the country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Angara. Just for the record, we assume that the Department of Foreign Affairs, which is our principal agency on matters of maritime zone, have commented and given their views on this measure.
That's right, Mr. President. They were present in the 2 hearings we held. I think they were present in the deliberations in the House, since this is a House bill, and they were also present at currently in the session hall, and I had them look over my speech before I delivered it, Mr. President.
And they have fully endorsed the measure.
Yes, Mr. President, fully endorsed.
And just for the record, the chair assumes that this will strengthen our claim on the West Philippine Sea.
It should strengthen our negotiating position, Mr. President. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 5.
Before that,
I'm sorry, I withdraw my motion, Mr. President. We still have to. I move that we suspend consideration of Committee Report number 171 on House Bill 4889.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of measure is suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 586 under Committee Report number 107. This is the bill on the Registry of Deeds of Zamboanga Sibugay, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. In order.
The parliamentary status is that we are in the period of interpellations. I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Coco Pimentel.
Senator Pimentel is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Although no one has signified an intention to interpellate, we agreed during the last session when we tackled this that we will explore this presidential power to appoint. What is the true nature of this kind of power? Mr. President, we have been enlightened in the sense that the presidential power to appoint basically should not be subjected to conditions. And if the law can provide for the qualifications of the appointee, but we cannot put too many conditions or burden on the exercise of the presidential power to appoint. But at the same time, let me add that there are laws, and there is an existing law, especially the Property Registration Decree, which is a presidential decree, number 1529, which provides that registers of deeds shall be appointed by the President of the Philippines upon recommendation of the Secretary of Justice. So, I am not aware that this provision has been challenged before the courts and declared as unconstitutional for imposing a condition or a burden on the exercise of the presidential power to appoint. And the current measure that we are discussing precisely just follows that lead, which is found in Presidential Decree number 1529. But we will have to simplify because the present measure mentions really stick to the existing setup where the Register of Deeds will be appointed by the President of the Republic upon recommendation of the Secretary of Justice. But at the same time, again, let me also add that there is no legal obstacle to another official in the government, not the President. There is no rule in the Constitution which will prevent us from doing that. It is just addressed to our wisdom if we want to start a new rule or a new system, Mr. President.
Okay. So, yes, the chair was the one who raised those issues with those statements of the sponsor. What is the pleasure of the sponsor of the bank?
So this is just to answer your questions, Mr. President. And if the answers are satisfactory to you, we can now close the period of interpellation, proceed to committee to amendments, and then this we will have a very simple amendment that we will stick to the old rule that it shall be the President who will appoint upon the recommendation of the Secretary of Justice.
Would the sponsor be averse to a proviso on Section 2, which basically would say that nothing herein shall be construed as a limitation on the power of the President to appoint public officials? We can retain the recommendation, but let us have that clause which would retain the power of the President to disregard the recommendation.
So if that is the meaning, if that would be the meaning of the phrase to be inserted,
because
then
there is jurisprudence which says that a similar phrase found in other laws should be construed as merely requiring the advice of the lower officials on the President, not a limitation that the President can only appoint from those in the list of recommendees. In other words,
yes,
the danger of this provision is that is to the chair that it is a limitation so that but is not recommended by the Secretary of Justice may not be a valid appointment if you follow strictly the letter of the law. So that the suggestion is a proviso which basically says that nothing in this provision shall be construed as a limitation of the power of the President to appoint public officials.
I get your point, Mr. President, but if that is the case, that is the qualifier for the phrase upon the recommendation of the Secretary of Justice.
Yes.
Then maybe we just have to be direct to the point. Let us not have two phrases clarifying each other. Number one, we can drop the phrase upon the recommendation of the Secretary of Justice, or we can amend that phrase to read as follows: taking into consideration the recommendation of the Secretary of Justice.
Yeah, taking into consideration would probably not be violative of the presidential power to appoint, because he's just taking into consideration without being, without finding himself in a situation where he's bound to appoint only those from the list. That is the point of the chair. The presidential power to appoint should not be limited to those recommended only by the Secretary of Justice. A phrase taking into consideration may resolve that dilemma that we have.
And no need for this simple law to have some implication on the other laws, Mr. President. If we insert those that general phrase which you mentioned, Mr. President.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
So with that clarification, Mr. President, we will pursue that in the amendment period, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you.
Take into
Mr.
consideration.
Mr. President, there are no other senators who wish to interpolate, so we move to close the period of interpolation.
Period for interpolation is terminated.
We move to open the period of committee amendments if the sponsor is ready to introduce the committee amendments.
Okay. Just a parliamentary inquiry. Committee report does not propose any committee amendments, so this will be individual amendments, Mr. President.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So can we close the period of committee amendments?
We move to close the period of committee amendments and to open the period of individual amendments.
So carried. So closed. We now go to the period of individual amendments.
So I propose, I move, Mr. President, that we amend Section 2 of the said bill, line 6, by changing the word upon into the phrase taking into consideration, and by deleting the phrase the administrator of the land registration authority, parenthesis, open parenthesis, LRA, close parenthesis, and. So making the sentence read as follows. The first sentence of Section 2 read as follows. The Register of Deeds shall be appointed by the President, taking into consideration the recommendation of the Secretary of Justice, period. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, so carried.
The second amendment would be to spell out LRA in the second paragraph of Section 2 into Land Registration Authority, open parenthesis, LRA, close parenthesis. Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Hearing none, approved.
That would be all, Mr. President. Yes, that would be all. And I move that we close the period for individual amendments, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for individual
So
amendments.
terminated.
Move that we approve on second reading House Bill number 586 under Committee Report number 107.
Any objection? Hearing none. The House Bill 586 under Committee Report 107 is approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of the measure.
Suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend session for just 1 minute.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2789 under Committee Report number 161. This is the bill on youth participation, risk reduction, and management, Mr. President.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status is that the sponsor delivered his sponsorship speech. This is Senator Bam Aquino, last May 27. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations.
Period for interpellation is in order.
Mr. President, I was informed that no member of the Senate has registered to interpellate. I thus move that we close the period for interpellations.
Period for interpellation is terminated.
Likewise, Mr. President, there are no committee or individual amendments, so I move that we close the periods of amendment.
So terminated.
I move that we approve Senate Bill number 2789 under Committee Report number 161.
Any objection? Hearing none. Senate Bill 2789 under Committee Report 161 is approved on second reading.
Mr. President, the last item on the agenda is a brief matter which requires reconsideration on second reading of House Bill number 4308 under Committee Report number 101. This was the Davao Sports Academy, which we approved on second reading yesterday, because just one term that will be corrected. So I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 4308 under Committee
First,
Report.
can we reconsider approval on second reading? Is there any objection? There being none, the approval on second reading of the measure under consideration is in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we resume consideration of the said bill, House Bill 4308, under Committee Report number 101.
In order.
I move for recognition, Mr. President, to propose the amendment.
The acting majority.
An omnibus amendment that we're proposing to the Committee Report number 101. The words Davao Sports Academy shall be replaced with the words Davao del Norte Regional Sports Academy. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection here?
Mr. President, I move that we close the period of amendments.
Closed.
Mr. President, I move that we approve House Bill number 4308 under Committee Report number 101 on second reading.
On second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number
Suspended.
4308. Mr. President, I move that we adjourn session till Monday, June 8, 2015.
Session is adjourned until Monday, the 8th of June, 3 o'clock, 2015, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Thank you.